I thought it was just another typical Tuesday morning at Luminous Marketing Agency in downtown Portland, clutching what everyone assumed was a knockoff designer handbag. The whispers, the pointed stares, the barely concealed snickers from my colleagues. I'd grown accustomed to it all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Some moments define your entire life, and if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or laughed at for something that meant the world to you, you'll want to hear this story, because what unfolded will restore your faith in justice and remind you that sometimes the universe has a way of vindicating those who refuse to compromise their truth. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and until 6 months ago, I thought my biggest challenge was surviving the cutthroat world of digital marketing while carrying a handbag that made me the office laughingstock. Every morning, I'd walk through the gleaming lobby of our 32nd floor office building, past the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Columbia River, and into a workspace where appearances mattered more than talent, where designer labels spoke louder than innovative ideas, and where I'd somehow become the subject of endless speculation about my obviously fake Valentino bag. The bag itself was beautiful, a stunning piece of craftsmanship in deep burgundy leather, with intricate beadwork that caught the light just so. It had been my companion for 3 years, through job interviews, client presentations, late-night strategy sessions, and countless moments when I needed to feel confident and capable. But in the world of luminous marketing, where junior executives carried authentic Hermes and senior directors flaunted limited edition Chanel, my Valentino apparently screamed counterfeit to anyone who cared to look. It started innocently enough, the way workplace gossip always does. A casual comment here, a raised eyebrow there, whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by. "Did you see Elena's bag today?" they'd murmur. "She must think we're all idiots." The assumption was always the same. A girl from a working-class background, putting herself through night school for her MBA, obviously couldn't afford authentic designer pieces. Therefore, anything I carried must be fake, purchased from some back-alley vendor or sketchy online marketplace. The irony was suffocating, because these people knew nothing about my story, nothing about where that bag actually came from, nothing about the circumstances that had brought it into my life. They saw what they expected to see, made assumptions based on their own limited perspective, and never once considered that their judgment might be wrong. It was easier to laugh and gossip than to simply ask questions or, revolutionary concept, mind their own business. Working at Luminous Marketing had been a dream come true initially. The agency handled accounts for major fashion brands, luxury retailers, and lifestyle companies that I'd admired since college. Getting hired there straight out of my communications program felt like winning the lottery, especially given my background. I'd grown up in a small apartment above my grandmother's alterations shop in East Portland, surrounded by the smell of fabric softener and the constant hum of sewing machines. Money was always tight, luxuries were rare, and designer anything was completely out of reach. My grandmother, Elena Rodriguez, had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but determination and an extraordinary talent for working with fabric. She built her little alterations business from scratch, one hemmed dress and tailored suit at a time. Growing up, I'd spend hours in her shop after school, watching her transform ill-fitting garments into perfectly tailored pieces, seeing how her skilled hands could take something ordinary and make it extraordinary. She taught me that quality wasn't about labels or price tags. It was about craftsmanship, attention to detail, and the pride someone took in their work. But at Luminous Marketing, those lessons felt naive and outdated. Here, everything was about brand recognition, status symbols, and projecting an image of success, whether you'd earned it or not. My colleagues would spend entire paychecks on handbags and shoes, then eat ramen noodles for weeks to afford their next fashion statement. They'd rather carry authentic designer pieces and struggle financially than acknowledge that you could appreciate beautiful things without bankrupting yourself. The worst part wasn't even the gossip. It was how the assumptions about my bag began affecting how people treated me professionally. During team meetings, my ideas would be dismissed more quickly. When clients visited, I'd mysteriously be assigned to back-office tasks instead of presentations. The whispered comments about my fake bag somehow became whispered doubts about my authenticity as a marketing professional, as if carrying what they believed was a counterfeit somehow made me less capable of developing genuine, effective campaigns. My direct supervisor, Patricia Wells, was particularly brutal in her subtle undermining. She had this way of making cutting remarks that sounded almost supportive on the surface, but carried unmistakable venom underneath. "Elena, darling," she'd say with that perfectly practiced smile, "maybe for the Bergman Industries presentation you could borrow something from our sample closet? We want to make sure we're projecting the right image." The implication was always clear. My image, my style, my choices weren't good enough for our high-end clients. The breaking point came during our quarterly team meeting, when Patricia announced that Valentino's new creative director would be visiting our agency to discuss a potential collaboration. The room buzzed with excitement. Landing Valentino as a client would be massive for the agency, and everyone wanted to be part of the team that made it happen. But as Patricia outlined the presentation schedule and assigned roles, she looked directly at me with that same condescending smile. "Elena, I think it would be best if you handled the research and background preparation for this one," she said sweetly. "We'll want our most polished team members handling the actual client interaction." Around the conference table, I saw smirks and knowing glances. The message was received loud and clear. The girl with the fake Valentino bag couldn't be trusted to meet with actual Valentino representatives. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, I sat in my small studio apartment, staring at the bag that had caused so much trouble. Under the warm lamplight, the burgundy leather seemed to glow, and I could see every detail of the intricate beadwork that had drawn me to it in the first place. Running my fingers over the smooth surface, I remembered exactly how it had come into my life, remembered the moment that had changed everything for me 3 years earlier. I'd been working part-time at a high-end consignment shop called Threads of Time while finishing my degree. The owner, Mrs. Catherine Blackwell, was an elegant woman in her 70s who had an extraordinary eye for quality pieces and authentic craftsmanship. She'd taught me how to spot the differences between genuine designer items and clever replicas, how to read the subtle signs that separated mass-produced pieces from true luxury goods. Under her guidance, I developed an appreciation for beautiful things and the stories they carried. One rainy Thursday afternoon, a young woman had rushed into the shop, clearly upset and carrying an armload of designer pieces. She was probably in her early 30s, impeccably dressed but with tears in her eyes and desperation in her voice. She explained that she needed to sell everything immediately: a divorce, financial troubles, the need to start over somewhere new. Among the items she'd brought was the burgundy Valentino bag, along with several other pieces that I could tell were absolutely authentic. Mrs. Blackwell had been out that day, handling an estate sale across town, leaving me to manage the shop alone. The woman was asking far less than the items were worth, clearly more concerned with quick cash than fair prices. As I examined each piece, checking authentication markers and assessing condition, I found myself drawn to the Valentino bag. There was something about its elegant simplicity, the way the beadwork caught the light, the perfect proportions that made it both statement piece and everyday essential. When I mentioned how beautiful I thought it was, the woman's expression softened. "It was my favorite," she said quietly. "I carried it everywhere. Job interviews, first dates, important meetings. It always made me feel confident, like I could handle whatever came my way." She paused, looking at the bag with obvious affection. "I'd rather see it go to someone who'll appreciate it than just disappear into inventory." In a moment of impulse that I'd questioned many times since, I'd offered to buy the bag myself. Using money I'd been saving for textbooks and living expenses, I'd purchased it for significantly less than its retail value, but more than the woman had been asking. Mrs. Blackwell had always encouraged her employees to invest in quality pieces when opportunities arose, saying that true luxury wasn't about spending money you didn't have. It was about recognizing value in craftsmanship when you found it. The woman had seemed genuinely happy that the bag was going to someone who understood its worth. "Promise me you'll carry it with pride," she'd said as she handed it over. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve beautiful things." I promised, never imagining how prophetic those words would become. For 3 years, that bag had been my constant companion and source of confidence. When I'd interviewed at Luminous Marketing, I'd carried it and felt like I belonged in their glossy, high-end world. When I'd presented campaign ideas to demanding clients, I'd drawn strength from knowing I was carrying something beautiful and well-made, The bag had never been about impressing others or projecting wealth I didn't have. It had been about surrounding myself with quality and craftsmanship, about honoring the lesson my grandmother had taught me about recognizing true value. But somewhere along the way, my colleagues had decided that someone like me couldn't possibly own something authentic, and their assumptions had become accepted fact. The whispers and judgment had worn me down, making me second-guess myself and question whether I really belonged in their world. Maybe Patricia was right. Maybe I should just stick to research and background work, staying safely in the shadows while the polished team members handled the important clients. As I prepared for bed that night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to hide anymore, wasn't going to let other people's limited imagination dictate how I saw myself or what I was capable of achieving. The Valentino meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon, and regardless of whether Patricia wanted me there or not, I was going to find a way to be present when it happened. If my colleagues wanted to keep whispering about my fake bag, they were welcome to do so, but I wasn't going to let their ignorance keep me from pursuing opportunities I'd earned. The universe, it seemed, had other plans entirely. Plans that would vindicate everything I'd endured, validate every moment of self-doubt I'd pushed through, and remind everyone in that conference room that assumptions can be dangerous things. Sometimes the truth is stranger and more beautiful than fiction, and sometimes justice comes in forms you never expected. What happened the next day would become legendary at Luminous Marketing, the kind of story people would tell for years afterward. It would change how my colleagues saw me, how Patricia treated me, and most importantly, how I saw myself. But more than that, it would remind everyone present that authenticity isn't about labels or price tags. It's about staying true to yourself, even when the whole world seems determined to prove you wrong. The morning of the Valentino meeting arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning as I rehearsed different scenarios in my mind. Part of me wanted to march into Patricia's office and demand to be included in the presentation team. Another part whispered that maybe I should just accept my role in the background, avoid the potential humiliation of being dismissed in front of such important visitors. But as I got dressed that morning, carefully selecting my outfit, and, yes, carrying my burgundy Valentino bag, I felt a surge of the same determination that had gotten me through night school, through the grueling interview process at Luminous, through every challenge I'd faced in my 26 years. My grandmother had always told me that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was feeling afraid and choosing to move forward anyway. Mija, she'd say in her gentle but firm voice, the world will try to make you small, try to convince you that you don't belong in beautiful places or deserve beautiful things. But you must remember that your worth isn't determined by what others think they see. Your worth comes from who you are and what you choose to do with the gifts God gave you. Walking into the Luminous offices that morning, I could feel the familiar weight of judgment settling around me like a heavy cloak. The whispers seemed louder than usual, the stares more pointed. Word had clearly spread about the Valentino meeting, and everyone was buzzing with excitement about the potential new client. In the break room, I overheard Jennifer from Accounts Receivable talking to Michael from Creative about how certain people should probably dress more appropriately when important visitors were in the building. They both glanced meaningfully in my direction, their message unmistakably clear. But something had shifted in me overnight. Instead of shrinking under their scrutiny, I found myself standing a little taller, walking with a little more confidence. The bag on my shoulder wasn't a source of shame anymore. It was a reminder of my own journey, my own choices, my own refusal to let other people's limitations become my reality. I'd carried this bag through late-night study sessions, through the nerve-wracking months of job hunting, through presentations that had landed major clients for the agency. If my colleagues wanted to keep whispering about its authenticity, that said more about them than it did about me. Patricia had scheduled the Valentino meeting for 3 o'clock in our largest conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Pioneer Courthouse Square. As the morning progressed, I watched the chosen team members, all impeccably dressed, all carrying obviously expensive accessories, all radiating the kind of polished professionalism that Luminous prized above all else, huddling together to review their presentation materials. Jennifer Morrison, our senior account executive, kept adjusting her authentic Hermes scarf and checking her reflection in every available surface. David Chen from Creative wore a watch that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. Even Patricia had upgraded her usual ensemble with what looked like a brand new Chanel blazer. Around noon, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of eating lunch at my desk as usual, I walked down to the lobby cafe and treated myself to an actual meal. Not the usual sad desk salad, but a proper lunch with real food and a decent cup of coffee. Sitting by the window, watching the city bustle by outside, I thought about all the moments in my life when I'd been underestimated, dismissed, or written off entirely. The guidance counselor in high school who'd suggested I consider more realistic career goals. The professor in college who'd questioned whether someone from my background could really understand luxury brand marketing. The countless job interviews where I'd felt the subtle shift in energy when interviewers realized I wasn't from the same privileged world as most of their other candidates. Each time, I'd proven them wrong through sheer determination and hard work. I'd graduated summa cum laude despite working 3 part-time jobs to pay for school. I'd landed prestigious internships by being more prepared, more creative, and more dedicated than candidates with better connections. I'd earned my place at Luminous Marketing not because of family money or social connections, but because I understood brands and consumers in ways that went deeper than surface-level demographics and market research. But somehow, over the past 3 years, I'd let the constant whispers and subtle dismissals chip away at that confidence. I'd started second-guessing myself, started believing that maybe I really didn't belong in this world of polished presentations and designer everything. The irony was heartbreaking. I'd let other people's ignorance about my bag become a symbol of their broader dismissal of my capabilities, when the truth was so much more complex and beautiful than they could imagine. As I finished my lunch and prepared to head back upstairs, I caught a glimpse of myself in the cafe's mirror. The woman looking back at me was professionally dressed, competent, and carrying herself with quiet dignity. The burgundy bag on her shoulder was absolutely stunning, the kind of piece that spoke to an appreciation for craftsmanship and timeless elegance. There was nothing fake about the woman in that reflection, nothing counterfeit about her accomplishments or her dreams. It was time to stop letting other people's assumptions define how I saw myself. Back in the office, the energy was reaching fever pitch as the 3 o'clock meeting approached. Patricia had transformed into a whirlwind of nervous energy, adjusting and readjusting every detail of the conference room setup. The presentation materials were arranged with military precision, the water glasses positioned just so, even the temperature carefully calibrated to create the perfect environment for impressing our distinguished visitors. Watching her fuss over every minor detail, I realized something profound. Patricia was just as insecure as everyone else, just as desperate to prove herself worthy of being in the same room as true luxury brand royalty. At 2:30, Patricia gathered the chosen team members for one final briefing. I watched from my desk as they huddled in her office, going over talking points and strategy one last time. Through the glass walls, I could see Jennifer checking her makeup, David reviewing campaign concepts on his tablet, and Patricia giving what looked like an intense pep talk about the importance of making an impeccable first impression. None of them noticed me watching. None of them considered that the person they'd so casually dismissed might have insights or perspectives that could benefit their presentation. But that was about to change in ways none of us could have anticipated. At exactly 3 o'clock, the elevator doors opened to reveal 3 impeccably dressed individuals, who could only be the Valentino representatives. The first was a tall, elegant woman in her 40s, with the kind of effortless sophistication that spoke to years of working in high fashion. Behind her walked a younger man, probably in his 30s, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing glasses that somehow made him look both intellectual and impossibly stylish. But it was the third member of their group who made my heart stop entirely. He was probably in his late 50s, with silver hair that caught the light beautifully, and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings with the intensity of someone accustomed to seeing past surfaces to the truth underneath. His presence filled the entire lobby, not through volume or dramatics, but through the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to offer. Even before Patricia rushed forward with her practiced welcome speech, I knew I was looking at someone truly extraordinary. The introductions were a blur of handshakes and business cards, with Patricia practically glowing as she guided the Valentino team toward the conference room. I watched from my desk as the entire group swept past, noting how every head in the office turned to follow their progress. This was the kind of moments Luminous Marketing lived for, the chance to rub shoulders with true luxury brand royalty, to prove they belonged in the same league as the companies they so desperately wanted to represent. As they settled into the conference room, I found myself unable to concentrate on the quarterly budget reports spread across my desk. Through the glass walls, I could see Patricia launching into her opening remarks, Jennifer nodding enthusiastically at every word, David preparing to present his creative concepts. It was a perfectly choreographed performance, designed to showcase Luminous Marketing at its most impressive and professional. But something was bothering me about the whole situation, something I couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it was the way the silver-haired man kept looking around the office, his gaze lingering on details that others might miss. Maybe it was how the elegant woman seemed to be studying not just the presentation materials, but the people delivering them. Or maybe it was simply my own growing sense that I was watching a performance that was about to go very differently than anyone expected. 20 minutes into the presentation, something shifted. I could see Patricia's confident gestures becoming more animated, Jennifer's smile growing more strained, David's usually smooth delivery starting to falter slightly. The Valentino representatives were listening politely, but there was something in their body language that suggested they weren't entirely convinced by what they were hearing. The silver-haired man in particular seemed distracted, his attention wandering around the office space as if he was looking for something specific. That's when his gaze landed on me. Even from across the office, I could feel the intensity of his focus as he took in every detail of my appearance. His eyes moved from my face, to my outfit, to the burgundy bag sitting on my desk. And something in his expression changed entirely. What had been polite interest transformed into something much more focused, much more personal. He said something quietly to his companions, and both the elegant woman and the younger man turned to look in my direction as well. My heart started pounding as I realized that somehow, inexplicably, I had become the focus of their attention. Through the glass conference room walls, I could see Patricia following their gaze, her expression shifting from confident presenter to confused host as she tried to understand why her distinguished guests were suddenly more interested in her research assistant than her carefully prepared presentation. The silver-haired man stood up from the conference table, and I watched in amazement as he excused himself from the presentation and walked directly toward my desk. Every person in the office seemed to freeze as this obviously important figure crossed the space with purposeful strides, his eyes never leaving my face. Patricia's voice trailed off mid-sentence as she realized she was losing her audience to whatever was happening outside the conference room. When he stopped directly in front of my desk, the entire office fell silent. Even the usual background hum of keyboards and phone conversations seemed to pause as everyone strained to understand what was happening. The man's eyes moved slowly from my face to the burgundy bag, and when he looked back at me, there was something in his expression that made my breath catch in my throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying just a hint of an Italian accent that made every word sound like music. "I couldn't help but notice your bag. It's absolutely exquisite. May I ask where you acquired it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could feel every pair of eyes in the office focused on my response. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for during 3 years of whispers and assumptions. This was my chance to either vindicate everything I'd endured or confirm every doubt that had been whispered behind my back. I stood up slowly, my hand instinctively moving to touch the burgundy leather that had caused so much controversy. "I bought it from a consignment shop about 3 years ago," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "The woman who sold it said it had been her favorite piece, and she wanted it to go to someone who would appreciate the craftsmanship." The man's eyes lit up with something that looked remarkably like recognition and delight. "A consignment shop," he repeated thoughtfully. "And this woman, she told you it was her favorite?" "She did," I confirmed, feeling more confident with each word. "She said she'd carried it to job interviews and important meetings, that it always made her feel capable of handling whatever came her way." Behind us, I could hear Patricia clearing her throat impatiently, clearly frustrated that her important presentation had been derailed by questions about someone's handbag. But the silver-haired man seemed completely absorbed in our conversation, studying the bag with the intensity of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. "Would you mind," he said gently, "if I examined it more closely? I have something of a professional interest in such pieces." The office was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat as I carefully lifted the bag and placed it on my desk where he could see it better. His hands moved over the leather with the reverence of someone who understood exactly what they were touching, his fingers tracing the intricate beadwork with obvious familiarity and appreciation. What happened next would become the stuff of office legend. The story that would be retold at holiday parties and company gatherings for years to come. The story that would change everything about how people saw me, how they understood authenticity, and how dangerous assumptions can be when they're built on ignorance rather than truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.